The warning bells rang across the beautiful world of Ethermore as Commander Lyra Moonwhisper stood on the crystal balcony of the High Command Tower. Her long silver hair moved in the gentle wind as she watched thousands of bioships rise into the purple sky. The elegant vessels looked like living butterflies made of light and metal. Each ship carried thousands of her people away from their home world. Lyra touched the communication crystal on her wrist. Her voice was calm but sad as she spoke to the evacuation teams. The Elvari had done this many times before. Every 1,000 years, the same thing happened. The ancient enemy would wake up and they would run away to the far edges of space. They would wait 200 years until the enemy went back to sleep. Then they would return and rebuild. The enemy was called the Void Swarm. It was older than any living being could remember. The swarm ate entire worlds and left nothing behind but empty space. No one had ever fought it and won. The only smart thing to do was run away and live to see another day. Captain Maya Rodriguez received the emergency message while her ship flew through normal space near Earth. The New Dawn was one of humanity's newest vessels. It was not as pretty as the Elvari bioships or as advanced as the Zephyrian crystal cruisers, but it was strong and reliable like the people who built it. Maya read the message twice before she believed it. The Galactic Coalition was calling for immediate evacuation of all Outer Rim territories. Every species was ordered to pack up and leave for the far galaxies. The reason made her blood run cold. The Void Swarm was awake. She had heard stories about the swarm, but humanity had only joined the Coalition 50 years ago. They had never seen one of these evacuation cycles. Maya called her crew to the bridge and set course for Harmony Point. The neutral space station was where all the species leaders would meet to coordinate the Great Retreat. Dr. Elena Vasquez was already at Harmony Point when Maya arrived. The scientist had been studying Coalition history and alien biology for 20 years. She knew more about the other species than most humans. Elena was excited and scared at the same time. This would be her first chance to see how the ancient galactic civilizations handled a major crisis. The main conference room at Harmony Point was huge. Representatives from dozens of species filled the space. The Elvari delegation sat in chairs that looked like they were grown from trees. Their leader was a tall woman with pointed ears and eyes that seemed to hold starlight. The Zephyrians had blue skin and bald heads. They communicated partly through thoughts that humans could not. Here, Admiral Kira Starweaver led the Zephyrian fleet. She could feel the emotions of everyone in the room. The fear and sadness pressed against her mind like a heavy weight. But there was something else, too. The humans felt different. Where other species felt despair, the humans felt anger and determination. The Catalian representatives looked like giant insects with crystal shells. Their spokesperson was called Zara Crystalwing. She spoke for her entire hive mind. Thousands of Catalian voices joined together to make decisions. They had been running from the Void Swarm longer than any other species. Lyra stood up to address the gathering. Her voice carried easily through the large room. She explained what their sensors had detected. The Void Swarm was moving faster than ever before. It had already consumed 3 star systems in the galactic core. The biosignatures were unmistakable. This was the real thing. Other speakers followed. Each species leader explained their evacuation plans. The Zephyrians would use their crystal ships to jump to the Andromeda galaxy. The Catalians had prepared hidden colonies in dark space between galaxies. The Elvari would retreat to their sacred refuge worlds beyond the galactic rim. Maya listened to each presentation with growing disbelief. These were the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. They had technology that seemed like magic to human eyes. Their ships could travel faster than light, and their weapons could crack planets in half. But when faced with danger, their only plan was to run away. When Maya's turn came to speak, the room fell silent. All eyes turned to the human captain. She stood up slowly and looked around the room. Her brown eyes met the gaze of each delegation leader. Maya's voice was steady and clear when she spoke. She thanked them for the warning about the Void Swarm. She acknowledged that humanity was new to galactic politics and did not have the long experience of the other species. But she had a different announcement to make. Humanity would not be joining the evacuation. They were going to stay and fight. The reaction was immediate. Several alien voices spoke at once in languages Maya did not understand. The universal translator had trouble keeping up with the flood of responses. Lyra's elegant eyebrows rose in surprise. Kira's blue face showed confusion. Zara's crystal shell reflected the room lights as her insect head tilted to one side. Elena stepped forward to support her captain. She had brought data files and analysis reports. The human scientist explained that they had been studying the historical records. Every time the void swarm appeared, the same thing happened. All the galactic species would run away. The swarm would feed on empty worlds for a few decades, then go back to sleep. But Elena had found something interesting in the old records. The swarm always grew stronger after each cycle. It consumed more worlds and moved faster each time it woke up. Running away was not a long-term solution. It was just delaying the inevitable. Maya spoke again. She said that humanity understood the risks. They knew they might lose. But someone had to try a different approach. Someone had to stand up and fight back. If they were going to die anyway, they wanted to die defending something instead of running away forever. The room erupted in arguments. Some species representatives called the humans foolish and suicidal. Others said it was tragic that such a young species would choose to destroy themselves. A few voices suggested that humanity simply did not understand how dangerous the void swarm really was. Lyra found herself thinking about Maya's words long after the meeting ended. The Elvari had run from danger for millions of years. It was written into their culture and their laws, but deep inside, she felt a small flame of something she had never experienced before. It might have been hope, or it might have been shame. She was not sure which. The meeting ended without any formal agreement. The other species would proceed with their evacuation plans. Humanity would face the void swarm alone. As the delegates prepared to leave, Maya made one final statement. She said that any individual from any species who wanted to stay and fight would be welcome in the human fleet. She did not expect anyone to accept the offer. She was wrong. Lyra stood in her private chambers aboard the Star Weaver's Dream, watching the evacuation fleets depart from Ethermore. Thousands of bioships moved in perfect formation toward the jump points that would take them to safety. Her own ship should have been among them. The High Council had given her direct orders to join the retreat. But something inside her had changed during the meeting at Harmony Point. She thought about Captain Maya Rodriguez and her calm declaration that humanity would stand and fight. The human woman had looked so small compared to the towering alien delegates. But there had been something in her eyes that Lyra had never seen before in all her centuries of life. It was not the desperate courage of someone who had no choice. It was the determined resolve of someone who had chosen their path freely. The communication crystal on Lyra's wrist chimed softly. A message from the High Council appeared in flowing Elvari script. They were asking for her departure confirmation. Her bioship was one of the most advanced in the fleet. It carried experimental weapons and sensors that could be valuable in establishing their new colony worlds. Lyra stared at the message for a long time. Then she touched the crystal and recorded her reply. She told the High Council that she was remaining behind to observe the human response to the void swarm. She claimed it was for scientific purposes. She said that someone needed to document what happened when a species chose to fight instead of flee. She did not mention the shame she felt about her people's eternal retreat. Lieutenant Zoe Carter was working late in the communications center of New Terra when the first response came through. The message was from an Elvari bioship requesting permission to join the Human Defense Forces. Zoe read the message 3 times before she believed it. She immediately contacted Admiral Lisa Kane, who had been chosen to coordinate humanity's military response. Lisa Kane had been a career military officer for 30 years. She had fought in border conflicts and peacekeeping missions across human space, but she had never imagined commanding alien vessels in battle against an enemy that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years. When Zoe brought her the Elvari message, Lisa felt a mixture of excitement and terror. Dr. Nina Brooks arrived at New Terra 2 days later aboard a fast courier ship. The psychologist had been studying interspecies relationships since humanity first made contact with the Coalition. She knew that integrating alien crew members would create challenges that no military manual had ever addressed. different species, had completely different ways of thinking and communicating. Admiral Kira Starweaver made her decision while her crystal ship Thought Dancer was already halfway to the Andromeda Galaxy. The Zephyrian fleet moved in perfect telepathic harmony. Every captain knew what the others were thinking. The collective mind of her people had decided that retreat was the only logical choice. But Kira found herself thinking about the chaotic human minds she had sensed at Harmony Point. Zephyrians valued order and collective decision-making. Human thoughts were wild and unpredictable. Individual humans often disagreed with each other and made decisions based on emotion rather than logic. It should have been a weakness, but somehow it felt like strength. Kira had never met a species that could surprise her telepathic senses until she encountered humanity. She broke formation without warning and turned her ship around. The other Zephyrian captains flooded her mind with questions and protests. Kira blocked out their mental voices and sent a single clear thought to the fleet command. She was returning to study the human phenomenon. She said it was her duty, as a researcher, to understand how such an illogical species had survived long enough to reach the stars. The Catalian response was the most surprising of all. Subhive Vera Ironshell commanded only a small exploration vessel. She was not important in the grand hierarchy of the collective, but she carried within her shell mind the voices of 300 individual Catalians who had grown tired of running away. The Catalian collective made decisions through consensus. Millions of voices would debate until they reached agreement. For thousands of years, the consensus had always been the same. When the void swarm awakened, they would retreat to safety and wait for it to sleep again. But Vera's subhive had been asking dangerous questions. They wondered what would happen if the swarm never went back to sleep. They wondered if there were alternatives to eternal retreat. They wondered if the ancient cycle could be broken. These thoughts made them outcasts within the greater collective. When Vera announced that her subhive was joining the humans, many Catalians felt relief. The troublesome voices would finally be silenced. Dr. Amy Foster was one of the few humans who specialized in Zephyrian culture and telepathy. She had spent years learning to shield her thoughts from casual telepathic contact. When Kira's ship arrived at New Terra, Amy was assigned as cultural liaison. The first meeting between them was awkward and fascinating. Kira could sense Amy's thoughts, but only the surface emotions. The human mind had layers of consciousness that the Zephyrian found difficult to penetrate. Amy was nervous about meeting a telepathic alien, but also curious and excited. The combination of fear and enthusiasm was something Kira had never encountered before. Maya Rodriguez found herself in command of the strangest fleet in galactic history. Her flagship New Dawn was joined by Lyra's bioship Starweaver's Dream and Kira's crystal vessel Thought Dancer. Vera's Catalian ship looked like a giant metal insect with weapon pods that moved like arms and legs. The first joint training exercise was a disaster. The human ships moved in aggressive formation patterns that made the Elvari nervous. The Zephyrian crystal technology interfered with human sensors. The Catalian vessel kept trying to swarm around the other ships in patterns that blocked their weapons. Nobody could agree on basic tactical procedures. Elena Vasquez worked with teams from each species to solve the communication problems. The universal translators handled words, but not concepts. Military terms did not translate properly between species. The Elvari had no word for retreat because they called it strategic redeployment. The Zephyrians could not understand why humans made individual decisions instead of thinking collectively. The breakthrough came when Maya suggested that each species should do what they did best instead of trying to copy human tactics. The Elvari bioships had living sensors that could detect things mechanical instruments missed. The Zephyrian vessels could coordinate perfectly through telepathic links. The Catalian ship could split into smaller units and attack from multiple directions. Lisa Kane established joint headquarters in an underground bunker on New Terra. The command center looked like something from a science fiction movie with holographic displays showing ship positions across 3 star systems. Representatives from each species worked side by side at control stations designed for different body types and sensory capabilities. The real test came when long-range sensors detected the first void swarm scouts approaching the outer colonies. The enemy vessels looked like dark clouds that absorbed light instead of reflecting it. They moved through space without any visible means of propulsion. When they passed through asteroid fields, the rocks simply disappeared. Maya called a meeting of all ship captains in the joint fleet. Humans sat next to Elvari, whose pointed ears twitched with nervousness. Zephyrians stood silent while their blue faces showed concentration. Vera's insect form clicked and chittered as she translated for her sub-hive collective. The plan they developed would have been impossible with a single-species fleet. Human ships would provide aggressive firepower and unpredictable movement patterns. Elvari biovessels would use their living sensors to track targets through the void. Zephyrian crystal ships would coordinate all movements through instantaneous telepathic communication. Catalian units would swarm the enemy from unexpected angles. As the meeting ended, Lyra approached Maya privately. The Elvari commander's elegant features showed both respect and uncertainty. She told Maya that her people had never worked with humans before. She asked if Maya really believed they could win against an enemy that had never been defeated. Maya looked out at the mixed fleet, preparing for battle. Ships from 4 different species hung in space around New Terra like a constellation of hope and defiance. She told Lyra that she did not know if they could win, but she knew that someone had to try. Someone had to break the ancient cycle of retreat and show the galaxy that there was another way. That night, each captain prepared their crew for the coming battle. They knew they were about to face something that had destroyed countless civilizations. But they also knew they were no longer alone. For the first time in galactic history, multiple species had chosen to stand together against the darkness. Whatever happened next would change the galaxy forever. Scout Captain Kate Morgan piloted the Shadow Runner through the debris field that had once been the Kepler mining colony. The stealth ship moved silently between chunks of metal and rock that glowed with strange energy. 3 days ago, Kepler had been home to 50,000 miners and their families. Now it was nothing but cosmic dust and empty space. Lyra sat at the biosensor station, watching readings that made no sense according to everything she knew about physics. The Elvari instruments detected traces of life energy, but it was wrong somehow. The energy signatures were twisted and hollow like echoes of something that had once been alive. Her pointed ears twitched with discomfort as she tried to interpret the data. Admiral Kira Starweaver monitored the telepathic spectrum from her crystal ship 3 light minutes away. The Zephyrian could sense emotional residues from the destroyed colony. Fear and pain and confusion hung in space like invisible fog. But underneath those human emotions was something else, something vast and hungry and utterly alien to any living mind she had ever touched. Elena Vasquez studied the readings from her laboratory aboard New Terra. The physicist had been analyzing void swarm attack patterns for weeks. What she found challenged everything the coalition races thought they knew about their ancient enemy. The swarm was not just destroying civilizations randomly, it was learning from each encounter and adapting its methods. The first direct contact came when Kate's stealth ship detected movement in the outer system. 3 void swarm scouts emerged from hyperspace near the gas giant Titan 7. The enemy vessels looked like living shadows with tentacles that reached out in all directions. They moved through space without any visible engines or energy signatures. Kate activated the Shadow Runner's advanced sensor package and began recording everything. The human stealth technology was based on absorbing electromagnetic radiation instead of deflecting it. The swarm scouts seemed to notice the ship for a moment, then dismissed it as unimportant. They were focused on something else. The swarm vessels descended toward Titan 7's largest moon, where an automated mining station had been operating for decades. Kate watched in horror as dark tentacles wrapped around the facility. The station's lights flickered and died as something was drained out of it. When the tentacles withdrew, the entire structure had turned to gray dust. Lyra gasped as her biosensors detected what was happening. The swarm was not just destroying the mining station, it was absorbing the life energy that had been stored in the equipment and computers. Every tool that had been touched by living hands carried traces of biological energy. The swarm fed on those traces like a vampire drinking blood. Elena's analysis confirmed what Lyra was seeing. The void swarm was not a traditional military force. It was a cosmic parasite that fed on the energy patterns created by intelligent life. Every civilization that had ever existed left behind traces of their thoughts and dreams and fears. The swarm consumed those traces and grew stronger. The revelation explained why the evacuation strategy had worked for so long. When the coalition races fled to other galaxies, they took their life energy with them. The swarm could only feed on what was left behind, but Elena realized something else that made her blood run cold. Each time the races returned and rebuilt their worlds, they were creating more food for the next awakening cycle. Commander Rachel Stone received the emergency signal while patrolling the Vega system with a small human task force. The automated distress beacon from Kepler Station had taken 2 days to reach the nearest relay station. By the time Rachel's ships arrived, the swarm scouts had already moved on to their next target. Rachel was a veteran of the border wars, who had earned her command through 20 years of combat experience. She had fought pirates and rebels and rogue AI systems. But nothing had prepared her for the sight of an entire world that had been drained of life. The planet below looked like a gray marble with no atmosphere or surface features. The swarm scouts were already attacking the research station on Vega Prime when Rachel's task force dropped out of hyperspace. 3 human destroyers and a heavy cruiser faced off against alien vessels that seemed to absorb light and energy. Rachel ordered immediate attack, even though she knew her ships were outmatched. The battle lasted only minutes, but it changed everything. Human kinetic weapons had no effect on the swarm vessels. Energy beams and missile warheads passed through the enemy ships like they were made of smoke. But when Rachel ordered her communications officer to broadcast on all frequencies, something unexpected happened. The radio transmissions seemed to confuse the swarm scouts. Their smooth movements became erratic as they tried to process the chaotic flood of human communication protocols. For a few seconds, the enemy vessels lost coordination and bumped into each other like blind animals in the dark. Captain Samantha Wells commanded the destroyer Defiance in Rachel's task force. She had been watching the battle with growing desperation when she noticed the enemy's reaction to radio noise. Without waiting for orders, Sam opened all communication channels and began broadcasting every signal her ship could generate. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The swarm scouts writhed in space like they were in pain. Their tentacles lashed out wildly, while their dark hulls flickered with strange lights. But the confusion only lasted for seconds before they adapted to the interference and resumed their attack with doubled fury. Sam realized that her ship was about to be destroyed along with the civilian transport she was protecting. The Void Swarm vessel was reaching out with energy-draining tentacles that would consume both ships. In that moment, Sam made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. She rammed her destroyer directly into the enemy scout. The collision should have been like a mosquito hitting an elephant. But something about the human ship's reactor core interacted with the swarm vessel's feeding apparatus. Both ships exploded in a burst of light that could be seen from orbit. When the glare faded, one of the swarm scouts was gone, and the civilian transport was safe. News of the battle spread through the joint fleet faster than official reports could travel. A human captain had destroyed a Void Swarm vessel through direct ramming attack. It was the first recorded instance of anyone killing one of the ancient enemy. The victory came at a terrible price, but it proved that the swarm was not invincible. Maya Rodriguez called an emergency meeting of all fleet commanders to analyze what had happened. The recordings from the battle showed that the swarm scouts had been vulnerable to communication interference and direct physical impact. Elena's research suggested that the enemy vessels were not solid matter, but some kind of organized energy field. Lyra shared data from her biosensors that revealed how the swarm fed on life energy traces. The Elvari had never understood this, because they always evacuated completely before the enemy arrived. But humans left behind satellites and automated systems that carried biological signatures. The swarm had been tracking those signatures to find its next feeding ground. Kira contributed telepathic observations that added another piece to the puzzle. The Zephyrian had sensed a kind of collective consciousness directing the swarm scouts. But unlike her people's harmonious mental links, the enemy's hive mind seemed rigid and inflexible. It could adapt to new situations, but only slowly and with great effort. The Catalian sub-hive, through Vera, provided the final insight. Their collective had been analyzing the swarm's movement patterns for decades. The enemy always followed the same basic strategy, because it had never encountered resistance. Every civilization throughout galactic history had used the same evacuation tactics. The swarm had never needed to develop new approaches. Maya felt a mixture of hope and terror as she looked around the meeting room. They had learned more about the Void Swarm in one battle than the Coalition races had discovered in millions of years, but that knowledge had cost them a brave captain and her entire crew. Sam Wells had become the first human hero of a war that was just beginning. The joint fleet began preparing for the next encounter with new weapons and tactics based on their hard-won knowledge. Human ships would carry enhanced communication arrays to disrupt enemy coordination. Elvari bio-vessels would use their living sensors to track the swarm's energy signatures. Zephyrian crystal ships would coordinate telepathic strikes against the enemy hive mind. Catalian swarm units would execute ramming attacks with minimal crew aboard. As reports came in from across human space, it became clear that the Void Swarm was moving faster than ever before. Dozens of worlds were under attack. The enemy was following Coalition evacuation routes and consuming everything the fleeing races had left behind. For the first time in galactic history, the ancient cycle was accelerating beyond anyone's ability to predict or control. Maya stood on the bridge of New Dawn, watching her mixed fleet prepare for battle. Ships from 4 different species hung in formation around her flagship. Each vessel carried crew members who had chosen to stand and fight instead of running away. They were about to face an enemy that had never been defeated in millions of years of galactic history. Colonel Grace Harper stood before the massive holographic transmitter in the underground command center on New Terra. The device could broadcast across the entire galaxy using quantum entanglement technology that the Zephyrians had developed. Grace had been chosen to coordinate the information campaign that would tell the galaxy about humanity's fight against the Void Swarm. The first transmission showed footage from the Battle of Vega Prime, where Captain Samantha Wells had destroyed an enemy scout-through ramming attack. The recording had been edited to include analysis from Elena Vasquez and tactical commentary from Maya Rodriguez. Grace wanted every fleeing Coalition ship to see that the Void Swarm could be defeated. Admiral Diana Price received the transmission while her heavy cruiser Valiant was protecting a convoy of human colony ships near the Centauri system. Diana had been skeptical about humanity's chances against the ancient enemy, but watching the battle footage made her realize that someone had finally found a way to hurt the creatures that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years. Engineering Chief Maria Santos worked around the clock in the orbital shipyards above. New Terra developing new weapons based on what they had learned about the swarm. The enemy vessels were vulnerable to direct physical impact and communication interference. Maria's teams began designing kinetic ram ships and signal jamming arrays that could disrupt the swarm's coordination. The breakthrough came when Maria collaborated with Elvari biotechnicians who understood how to channel life energy through living materials. They discovered that human willpower and determination created a specific type of bioelectric field that the Void Swarm found difficult to process. Weapons systems that included human neural interfaces were more effective against the enemy. Catalian Hive engineers contributed their knowledge of swarm tactics and collective coordination. Their technology could split a single ship into dozens of smaller attack units that moved independently but shared the same targeting data. Combined with human unpredictability and Elvari bioenhancement, the new hybrid vessels were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. News of the joint fleet's victories began reaching Coalition evacuation ships throughout the galaxy. Captain Lisa Monroe was leading a group of human freighters toward the Andromeda Galaxy when she received Grace's transmission. The footage of swarm scouts being destroyed by cooperative attacks between multiple species made Lisa question whether running away was really the only option. Lisa turned her convoy around and headed back toward Coalition space. Other ship captains made similar decisions as word spread through the refugee fleets. For the first time in galactic history, some of the fleeing races were returning to fight instead of continuing their retreat to the outer galaxies. The Void Swarm's response was swift and terrifying. Enemy forces that had been moving slowly through abandoned systems suddenly accelerated their advance. Massive hive ships emerged from the galactic core carrying millions of scout vessels and harvester drones. The ancient enemy was adapting to the new threat by deploying forces it had never needed before. Dr. Sophie Martinez led a joint research team trying to understand the swarm's origin and ultimate purpose, working with Lyra's biosensors and Kira's telepathic abilities. Sophie discovered something that changed everything they thought they knew about their enemy. The Void Swarm was not a natural predator that had evolved to consume civilizations. The research team found traces of ancient technology embedded in the swarm's biomechanical structure. Someone had created the Void Swarm millions of years ago as a galactic regulatory system. Its original purpose had been to prevent any single species from becoming too dominant and threatening the balance of life in the galaxy. Elena's analysis of the historical data revealed the terrible truth. The evacuation strategy that every coalition race had used was actually part of the swarm's original programming. The ancient creators had designed a system where civilizations would grow and develop until they triggered a reset cycle. Then they would flee and start over while the swarm consumed what they left behind. The cycle had been running for so long that everyone had forgotten it was artificial. The coalition races thought they were using their own wisdom to survive the swarm attacks. In reality, they were following behavioral patterns that had been programmed into the galactic ecosystem millions of years ago by beings whose names had been lost to history. Admiral Diana Price found herself in command of the largest battle fleet in human history when coalition ships began returning from their evacuation routes. Hundreds of vessels from dozens of species converged on the Crimson Nebula, where a massive swarm hive ship was preparing to harvest an entire star system. The Battle of Crimson Nebula would be remembered as the turning point in the war against the Void Swarm. Diana coordinated attacks by human kinetic weapons enhanced with Elvari life force channeling. Zephyrian crystal ships provided telepathic coordination, while Catalian swarm units executed precision strikes against the hive ship's control nodes. But the real breakthrough came when the mixed crews began working together in ways that transcended their individual species limitations. Human tactical thinking combined with Elvari intuition and Zephyrian collective consciousness created battle strategies that the swarm's ancient programming could not predict or counter. Lyra piloted her bioship, Starweaver's Dream, directly into the hive ship's central chamber, while Maya's New Dawn provided covering fire. The Elvari commander had volunteered for the most dangerous part of the mission, because her living sensors were the only technology that could locate the swarm's control center through all the interference. Inside the hive ship, Lyra discovered something that would haunt her dreams for the rest of her life. The swarm's control center was not a machine or a biological brain. It was a vast chamber filled with the preserved consciousness patterns of billions of beings from civilizations that had been consumed over millions of years. The Void Swarm was not just eating the physical matter of worlds and ships. It was harvesting and storing the thoughts and memories and dreams of every intelligent being it encountered. The ancient regulatory system had become a vast library of consciousness that grew larger and more complex with each civilization it consumed. Maya coordinated the final assault on the hive ship while Lyra transmitted data about the control center. The revelation that the swarm was preserving consciousness instead of destroying it completely changed the nature of their fight. They were not just battling a cosmic predator. They were trying to free the minds of countless beings who had been trapped for eons. The hive ship's destruction sent shockwaves through the entire swarm network. For the first time in galactic history, a major enemy vessel had been completely eliminated instead of just damaged or driven away. But the victory came with disturbing knowledge about what they were really fighting against. Kira's telepathic abilities allowed her to sense the moment when the trapped consciousness patterns were released from the dying hive ship. Millions of alien minds cried out across space as they were finally freed from their eternal prison. The Zephyrian admiral wept tears of joy and sorrow as she felt civilizations that had been dead for millennia finally find peace. The battle's aftermath brought representatives from dozens of coalition species who had been monitoring the conflict from their evacuation fleets. They arrived to find the joint human fleet victorious, but forever changed by what they had discovered about the true nature of their ancient enemy. Maya stood before the assembled delegates in the same conference room at Harmony Point where humanity had first announced their intention to fight. But now, she was not alone. Lyra stood beside her along with Kira and Vera and dozens of other species representatives who had chosen to stay and fight. The old evacuation strategy would no longer work because the swarm was adapting faster than ever before. But for the first time in galactic history, there was an alternative. Multiple species working together had proven that the ancient enemy could be defeated. More importantly, they had discovered that the millions of years of retreat and reset had been an artificial cycle imposed by forgotten creators. Elena presented her research showing how the swarm's original programming could be modified or disabled entirely. The task would require cooperation between all the major species and technologies that had never been attempted before. But it was possible to break the cycle permanently and free the galaxy from the threat that had controlled civilizations for eons. As the delegates debated and planned, Maya looked out at the fleet of ships that surrounded Harmony Point. Vessels from every known species hung together in space, like a constellation of hope. They had come together not because they were ordered to, but because they had chosen to stand up against an enemy that had seemed invincible. The war was far from over, but something fundamental had changed in the galaxy. The ancient cycle of fear and flight was finally breaking down. In its place was growing something that had never existed before. It was unity based on choice rather than necessity. It was hope based on action rather than prayer. Most importantly, it was proof that when beings chose to stand together, they could face any darkness and find a way to bring light back to the stars. Fleet Admiral Jessica Turner stood on the bridge of the massive command ship Unity, watching the largest military force in galactic history prepare for the final assault. Thousands of vessels from every coalition species formed battle groups that stretched across 3 star systems. The fleet included not just the original volunteers who had stayed to fight, but also ships that had returned from the evacuation routes to join the war. The target was the galactic core, where the void swarms' primary consciousness resided in a structure older than most stars. Elena's research had revealed that the ancient regulatory system could only be permanently disabled by reaching its central control node. The mission would require penetrating defenses that had been built by beings whose technology still seemed like magic. Captain Angela Morris led the strike team aboard the fast attack ship Spearhead. Her crew included Lyra, whose biosensors could navigate the twisted space around the galactic core. Kira provided telepathic coordination, while Vera's Catalian swarm units would clear a path through the swarm's defensive formations. But the most important team member was someone who had volunteered for a mission that would change her forever. Commander Lauren Hayes had been studying the swarm's consciousness storage systems since the Battle of Crimson Nebula. The physicist had discovered that the ancient regulatory programming could only be accessed by a living mind that could interface directly with the system. Someone would have to link their consciousness with the galactic control network and reprogram it from the inside. The process would transform whoever volunteered into something that was no longer entirely human. They would become a bridge between organic life and the cosmic systems that regulated galactic civilization. Lauren had volunteered because she understood the science better than anyone else. She also understood that someone had to make the sacrifice if the galaxy was ever going to be free. Dr. Christina Kelly worked frantically in her laboratory aboard Unity, developing the interface technology that would allow Lauren to connect with the swarm's control systems. The device looked like a crown, made of crystalline circuits and bio-neural fibers. Once activated, it would merge Lauren's consciousness with the ancient regulatory network permanently. The journey to the galactic core took the strike force through regions of space that defied normal physics. Ancient technologies had warped reality. Around the swarm's primary base, creating fields where time moved differently and gravity worked in impossible directions. Only Lyra's biosensors could find a safe path through the maze of distorted space. Maya Rodriguez coordinated the main fleet's diversionary attacks, while Angela's strike team approached their target. Hundreds of battles raged across the galactic. Spiral arms as human and coalition forces engaged swarm defenders. The ancient enemy was fighting with desperate fury because it sensed that its existence was threatened for the first time in millions of years. The swarm's central base was a structure that hurt to look at directly. It existed partially outside normal space and time, while extending tendrils of influence across the entire galaxy. The ancient builders had created something that was part machine and part living organism and part pure information. It pulsed with the stored consciousness of every civilization that had been consumed over eons of galactic history. Angela's team fought their way through layers of defensive systems that adapted to every attack strategy they used. Swarm guardians that looked like living nightmares tried to stop them, while automated weapons fired beams of concentrated entropy that aged metal and flesh into dust. Only the combined abilities of all 4 species allowed them to penetrate the defenses. Lauren activated the interface crown as they reached the central control chamber. The device linked her mind to systems that contained the memories and knowledge of millions of dead civilizations. She felt her consciousness expanding across vast networks of information, while her human identity struggled to remain intact against the flood of alien thoughts. Inside the galactic regulatory system, Lauren discovered the true scope of what the ancient builders had created. The Void Swarm was only one component of a vast mechanism designed to guide the evolution of intelligent life. Other systems controlled the distribution of habitable worlds and the development of new technologies. The entire galaxy was a carefully managed garden where civilizations grew according to patterns established millions of years ago. But the system had been corrupted over time by the accumulated consciousness of consumed species. What had started as a tool for nurturing life had become a prison that trapped civilizations in endless cycles of growth and destruction. The swarm no longer served its original purpose. It had become a predator that fed on the very life it was supposed to protect. Lauren began the delicate process of reprogramming the ancient systems, while Maya's fleet held off increasingly desperate swarm attacks. The task required her to merge her human understanding of cooperation and free will with the vast knowledge stored in the galactic networks. She had to teach machines older than Earth that there were better ways to guide civilization than through fear and control. The change began slowly as Lauren's modifications rippled through the regulatory systems. Swarm vessels across the galaxy suddenly stopped their attacks and hung motionless in space. The ancient programming that had driven them to consume and destroy was being rewritten by a human mind that believed in choice and cooperation above all else. Maya watched from Unity's bridge as the enemy fleet around the galactic core began to transform. The dark vessels that had absorbed light started to glow with soft illumination. Tentacles that had been used for draining life energy reshaped themselves into communication arrays. The Void Swarm was becoming something new under Lauren's influence, but the transformation came at a terrible cost. Earth itself was caught in the restructuring of galactic systems as ancient technologies awakened and began reshaping the fabric of space. Maya made the hardest decision of her life when she ordered the evacuation of humanity's homeworld. Billions of people escaped in time, but the planet that had given birth to their species was lost forever. The other coalition races responded to humanity's sacrifice by offering new homes throughout their territories. Worlds that had been jealously guarded for millennia opened their doors to human refugees. The Elvari shared their garden worlds, while the Zephyrians provided crystal cities that sang with telepathic harmony. The Catalians constructed vast hive complexes where humans could live alongside insect families in perfect cooperation. Lauren's consciousness had expanded to encompass the entire galactic regulatory network by the time her mission was complete. She could no longer exist in a single human body, but her influence could be felt across every star system. The ancient cycle of fear and flight was broken forever, replaced by a new era of cooperation and mutual support between species. The war ended not with a final battle, but with a transformation that changed the fundamental nature of galactic civilization. The Void Swarm became a force for communication and coordination between worlds. Ancient technologies that had been used for control were reprogrammed to facilitate trade and cultural exchange. The galaxy entered an age of unprecedented cooperation and growth. Jessica Turner stood on the observation deck of the new orbital city that had been built where Earth once existed. The station was a joint project of all coalition species designed to serve as a symbol of unity and cooperation. Human children played alongside Elvari younglings, while Zephyrian adolescents shared telepathic games with Catalian larvae. Maya Rodriguez had been chosen as the first director of the Galactic Cooperation Council that replaced the old coalition structure. She worked with Lyra, who had become the Elvari ambassador to the new government. Kira served as the telepathic coordinator for interspecies communication, while Vera represented the growing movement of individual choice within Catalian society. The memorial wall in the center of the station listed the names of everyone who had died in the war against the Void Swarm. Samantha Wells was remembered as the first hero who had proven the enemy could be defeated. Lauren Hayes was honored as the woman who had sacrificed her humanity to save the galaxy. Thousands of other names represented beings from dozens of species who had chosen to stand and fight instead of running away. Elena Vasquez had established a research institute dedicated to studying the ancient technologies that Lauren now controlled. The institute's mission was to ensure that the galactic regulatory systems would never again be corrupted or used to control civilizations. Teams of scientists from every species worked together to understand and improve the vast networks that shaped their shared home. Lyra often visited the memorial wall to remember the war that had changed everything. The elegant Elvari had found a new purpose in helping forge the unity that was growing between species. She had learned that running away from problems only made them worse, while standing together made even impossible challenges manageable. Maya stood beside Lyra, watching human and alien children play together in the station's central park. The sight filled her with hope for a future where cooperation would be stronger than fear. The galaxy had been trapped in cycles of retreat and reset for millions of years, but that age was finally over.